She was already halfway back into the car when she saw her. One foot in, one hand gripping the door. And then her eyes snagged on something across the street that made every muscle in her body lock up. Clara Williams, 38 years old, CEO of Williams & Cole Investments, a woman who had built her entire identity around never flinching, stood frozen in the cold evening rain, her breath caught somewhere between her throat and her lungs. Across the street, huddled beneath the narrow overhang of a shuttered chemist's shop, sat an old woman, thin, trembling, wrapped in a torn fabric the color of ash. A cracked plastic cup sat in front of her on the wet pavement. Nobody was stopping. Nobody was looking. Clara should not have been looking either, but the woman's face, what little of it was visible beneath the matted gray hair, made Clara's handbag slip from her fingers and hit the wet ground with a dull smack. Because she knew that face. She knew it the way you know, your own heartbeat. Quietly, without question. The way you know something that was built into you long before you understood what knowing even meant. The old woman turned, their eyes locked across 4 lanes of evening traffic, headlights cutting through the rain between them. And then the woman's lips moved. Clara could not hear the words over the noise of the city, but she did not need to. She had watched those lips form her name 1,000 times in childhood. She would recognize the shape of it anywhere. Clara. The world did not slow down. That only happens in films. In real life, everything keeps moving. Taxis honk, umbrellas bob past, a food vendor shouts a price to nobody in particular. And you are simply standing still inside all of it, completely and utterly undone. Because Clara Williams had stood at her mother's graveside 10 years ago. She had watched the casket lowered into the ground. She had placed a single white rose on the polished wood. So why was her mother sitting on the pavement across the street, begging for coins in the rain? That question, that single, impossible question, was about to rip open the most powerful family in the city. It was about to expose a lie so calculated, so ruthlessly maintained, that even the people paid to enforce it had started to forget it was a lie at all. But we are not starting there. To understand what Clara felt in that moment, truly feel it, not just observe it. You need to understand who she was, who her mother was, and who had decided 20 years earlier that one of them needed to disappear. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now let's get into this story. Clara grew up in the kind of house that looked like happiness from the outside. 3 stories, a garden with a real gardener, a neighborhood where the roads were smooth and the hedges were trimmed, and everyone drove slowly because there was never any reason to hurry. From the outside, the Williams family was the picture of achievement. A father who sat on boards and attended galas and whose name appeared in newspapers under words like philanthropist and visionary, and a mother who moved through their home with a quiet warmth that made it feel, despite all its grandeur, like somewhere you actually wanted to be. Her name was Margaret Williams, née Okafor, and she was, by every measure, the soul of that house. She was the one who remembered birthdays without writing them down, the one who sat at the edge of Clara's bed during thunderstorms and told stories until the fear passed, the one who kept a small notebook in the kitchen drawer where she wrote down things her daughter said that made her laugh, because she said she never wanted to forget them. She smelled of shea butter and Earl Grey and something else, something harder to name, something that simply smelled like safety. Clara adored her. Her father, Richard Williams, was a different kind of presence entirely. He was not cruel, exactly. Or at least, that was not how Clara understood him as a child. He was simply large. His moods filled rooms. His approval, when it came, felt enormous. His disapproval felt like weather. He had opinions about everything. What Clara wore, what she studied, who she spent time with, and he delivered those opinions with the quiet certainty of a man who had never in his life been seriously contradicted. Clara's mother was the only person in that house who ever pushed back against him. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. The way water pushes against stone, not breaking it, but never pretending it isn't there. Clara noticed the tension between them the way children notice these things, obliquely, in the space between conversations, in the silences that followed certain subjects. But she was a child. She filed it away as simply the texture of her parents' marriage and got on with the business of growing up. Then, 2 weeks before Clara's 18th birthday, her mother got sick. Suddenly, terrifyingly. A collapse in the kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara was at school. Her father was at a meeting. The housekeeper found her on the tiles next to an overturned cup of tea. By the time Clara was called home, her mother was in hospital. By the time she arrived at the hospital, her father was already in the corridor, his face set in an expression she had never seen on him before. Not grief. Something harder to read than that. "She went quickly," he said. "It was a brain aneurysm. She didn't suffer. You should take comfort in that." Clara stared at him. "I want to see her," she said. "That's not possible," he said. "She's my mother. I want to—" "Clara." He said it the way he said everything, with a weight that was supposed to end the conversation. "It's not possible. The doctors have advised against it. Trust me. It's better this way." She did not see her mother before the burial. The casket was closed. She placed a white rose on the wood and told herself that the hollow feeling in her chest was grief, and that grief eventually passed, and that she would survive it the way her father had survived everything, by not stopping, by not looking back, by converting pain into purpose. And that is exactly what she did. She threw herself into university, then into finance, then into building the kind of career that made people lower their voices slightly when they said her name. By 38, she was running the firm her father had handed her, though she had, through sheer force of will, transformed it into something entirely her own. She had wealth, influence, and a reputation for being the sharpest mind in any room she entered. She also had a scar that had never quite healed, a faint, persistent ache in the place where her mother used to be. She had never fully grieved, and deep in a part of her that she never examined too closely, something had always felt wrong about how it all happened. She had never been able to name it, had never tried, until that evening in the rain. Clara did not walk across the street so much as she was pulled. She left her handbag on the wet pavement, left her driver calling after her, left all the well-practiced composure she had spent 20 years building. And she simply crossed. Cars braked. Someone leaned on a horn. She did not hear any of it. She crouched down in front of the old woman and looked at her. Up close, she was smaller than she had appeared from across the street. Thinner. Her skin was dry and deeply lined, her hands wrapped around her plastic cup like she was afraid someone might take it. But her eyes, dark, still, utterly awake, were exactly as Clara remembered them. "Mom?" The word came out wrong. Too small, too young. The word of an 18-year-old, not a 38-year-old. "Mom, what is—" The old woman's face broke open. Not in relief exactly. In something more complicated than that. In the way a thing breaks when it has been held together by will alone for a very long time, and suddenly the will gives out. "Clara," she whispered. "My Clara, my girl." Clara grabbed her hands. The knuckles were rough. The nails were cracked. On the inside of her left wrist was a small scar, a burn from a hot pan, decades old. A scar Clara had kissed as a small child because her mother had told her kisses were the best medicine. Clara had told her daughter's story about that scar. She had told it to nobody. It lived inside her, one of 100 tiny private memories she kept like photographs in a drawer. Nobody could fake that scar. "They told me you were dead," Clara said. Her voice was shaking now. "We had a funeral. There was a casket. I put flowers on. Your—" "I know," her mother said. "I know what they told you." "How? How are you here? Where have you—" "Not here," the old woman said quickly. Her eyes moved up and down the street with a sharpness that did not belong to someone who was merely old and tired. They belonged to someone who had been watching their surroundings for a very long time. "Not in the street. Please, take me somewhere safe and I will tell you everything." Clara looked at this woman, this impossible woman, and made the only decision she was capable of making. "Come with me," she said. "If you're still watching up to now, type 'I'm still here' in the comments section. This story is only getting more intense from here." Clara did not take her to the family home. That house, the glass and steel penthouse apartment that she had purchased 3 years ago, separate from anything her father had ever owned, was where she took her instead. She settled her mother into the guest suite, ran a bath, found clean clothes, ordered food from a place 3 streets over, and sat in the kitchen while she waited, trying to breathe. Her hands would not stop shaking. Her driver had been dismissed. Her phone had been silenced. She had told nobody. She did not yet know what she was protecting. She only knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever her mother was about to tell her was something that could not be untold, and that once it was out in the world, nothing would be the same. Margaret Williams emerged from the guest suite 40 minutes later looking, in some essential way, more like herself. Still thin, still marked by years that Clara could not yet account for, but her back was slightly straighter, and the wildness in her eyes had settled into something quieter and more focused. She sat across the kitchen table from her daughter and folded her hands in front of her. "How long?" Clara asked. "How long have you been out there?" "On the streets? On and off. 4 years, maybe 5. "And before that?" Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Moving, always moving. Different cities, different names. I could not stay anywhere too long." "Why? Who was looking for you?" "Your father's people, at first. After a few years, I think he stopped looking. He assumed I was either dead or too broken to matter." A pause. He almost got that right. Clara put her hands flat on the table to stop them trembling. "Tell me from the beginning," she said. "Tell me everything." And Margaret did. Not all at once. Grief rarely comes all at once, but piece by piece, the way a person removes rubble from a collapsed place, carefully, watching for what might shift. She had not died. She had never been ill. The collapse in the kitchen had been real, but it had not been an aneurysm. It had been the result of something she had taken, something she had been given without her knowledge, something that was meant to hospitalize her long enough for arrangements to be made. "Arrangements?" Clara said. "Your father wanted me gone," Margaret said simply. "Not divorced. Gone. A divorce could be contested. A divorce would involve lawyers, and lawyers ask questions, and questions were the one thing your father could not afford at that particular moment." "Why? What was happening at that particular moment?" Her mother looked at her steadily. 6 months before my supposed death," she said, "I found something in your father's office. I was not looking for anything. I was searching for a pen. I opened the wrong drawer. What she had found was a ledger. Not a digital record, a physical ledger. Handwritten. The kind that people used when they did not want things to be easily discovered. And what was written inside it was not the kind of thing that could be explained away or dismissed as a misunderstanding. Richard Williams had been running a second set of accounts for nearly a decade. Money coming in from sources that had no legitimate explanation, amounts that dwarfed the official revenues of his companies, routed through shell structures in 4 different countries, withdrawn in portions carefully calculated to avoid detection, and the names beside some of those transactions. Government officials. Contracts that had been awarded by those same officials. Numbers that lined up with infrastructure projects, roads, schools, hospitals, that had been built at 3 times their actual cost, the difference carved off and redirected. Margaret had understood immediately what she was looking at. She had also understood immediately that she could not simply walk into her husband's study and confront him. She was not naive. She knew the man she had married. She had known him, truly, for longer than Clara understood. She knew what he was capable of when something threatened what he had built. So she had done something careful, something that had, in the end, saved her life and cost her everything else. She had made copies, and she had hidden them. And she had begun, quietly, to plan. But Richard had found out. "He didn't confront me directly," Margaret said. "That was never his style. He simply smiled at me across the dinner table and helped you with your homework and kissed me on the cheek before bed. And 3 weeks later, I woke up in a hospital room in a city 400 kilometers from home, with a nurse telling me that I had been very ill and that I needed rest, and that all arrangements had been taken care of." What arrangements? My death, my funeral, my burial. She said it without drama, the way you say something that has long since moved from the unbearable into the simply true. A doctor had signed a certificate. A body had been provided. I was told later it was a woman who had died in the same hospital unclaimed. There was a closed casket. There were flowers. And that was that. Clara was silent for a very long time. Then she said, "He told me it was better this way." "Yes," her mother said. "I imagine he did. I was 18. I was 18 years old, and he let me grieve you. He watched me grieve you. He sat at the dinner table with me for months afterwards, and—" She stopped. She stood up from the table and walked to the window and pressed her hand flat against the cold glass and looked out at the city. Her city, the city she had built her life in, the city her father moved through like a king. And she felt something shift inside her. Not breaking, reforming, into something harder and clearer and absolutely certain of what came next. "Where are the copies?" she said, without turning around. A silence. "Clara." "The copies of the ledger, Mum. Where are they?" Another silence. Longer this time. "I hid them before they took me to the hospital," Margaret said slowly. "In the old house, in the garden. I didn't know if they would still be there after 20 years. I didn't know if I would ever be able to go back." Clara turned from the window. "We're going back," she said. That was the point at which things became dangerous. Clara was not impulsive. That was one of the truest things about her. She spent 3 days planning before she did anything at all. 3 days during which she kept her mother hidden, spoke to nobody, went about her public life with the mechanical precision of someone who understood that the worst thing you could do when you had discovered a threat was to let the threat know you had discovered it. She went to the office. She attended meetings. She smiled at the right moments. And all the while, behind her eyes, she was building a case. Her father called on the second day. "You missed dinner on Sunday," he said. "I had a deadline," she said. "You look tired. Are you sleeping?" "I'm fine, Dad. Come to the club on Saturday. We'll have lunch. There are some people I'd like you to meet." "Of course," she said. "I'll be there." She hung up and sat, very still for a moment, listening to the silence on the other end of a dead call. He sounded exactly the same. That was the thing that frightened her most. Not the crime, not even the betrayal. The fact that he sounded exactly the same. On the third night, under cover of a family gathering that her father would not attend, Clara took her mother back to the old neighborhood. The house had been sold. Her father had moved into a newer, larger property years ago. But the garden backed onto a lane, and the new owners were away, and the specific stone her mother had described was still there, a flat gray slab at the base of the old oak that had been there since before Clara was born. They dug for 11 minutes. A waterproof case. Inside it, photographs of the ledger pages, 2 USB drives, a handwritten note in her mother's handwriting, and a sealed envelope addressed to a journalist at a national newspaper. An envelope her mother had prepared 20 years ago and never been able to deliver. Clara held it in both hands and felt the weight of it. 20 years. 20 years her mother had survived, homeless, hunted, silent, to protect this, to protect her. Because the note explained it. The note that her mother had written in the hospital in those first terrified days, before she understood that escape was the only option. The note that said, "If your father knows I have given this to anyone, he will use Clara. He will use my daughter against me, and I cannot let that happen. So I will disappear, and I will wait, and I will trust that the truth has its own timeline." Clara read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket. "Why didn't you come back when it was safe?" she asked. "When you stopped being afraid?" Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "Because I didn't know if you would believe me," she said at last. "I watched you from a distance sometimes. You became so much like him. So successful, so certain, so like him," Clara said quietly. "I didn't mean, no, you're right. I became like him, because he was all I had, because I thought that was what survival looked like." She looked at her mother. "I was wrong." She met her father for lunch on Saturday. The private club was all dark wood and leather, and the particular hush of a place where powerful men have been comfortable for a very long time. Richard Williams was already seated when she arrived, looking exactly as he always looked, tall, immaculate, at ease in a way that most people spent their entire lives trying to manufacture. He stood when he saw her, kissed her cheek, ordered her the tea she liked without being asked. "You look well," he said. "Thank you," she said. They talked about business for 20 minutes, about a merger she was considering, about a mutual acquaintance's retirement, about the weather, about a film he had recently seen. He was charming. He was warm. He was, as always, completely and convincingly himself. And then Clara set her teacup down. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I want you to answer me honestly, not because it will change anything, it won't, but because I think, after everything, you owe me that." Something shifted in his face. Almost nothing. Barely a flicker. But she was his daughter, and she had been studying his face for 38 years. "Of course," he said. "Did my mother die?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted. "Clara, did she die? Yes or no?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and set down his own cup, and the warmth went out of his face, the way heat leaves a room when the last fire goes out. "I did what I had to do," he said. "For this family. You destroyed her life. I protected everything we have. You staged her death. You paid people to falsify documents. You made your 18-year-old daughter grieve her mother for 20 years. She found things that were not her business," he said, and his voice had the quality of a door closing. "She would have used them. She was going to take everything I built and burn it down. She was going to expose a crime. She was going to destroy our family." "You destroyed our family," Clara said, 20 years ago, in a closed casket, while I stood there and thought I was saying goodbye to my mother." He studied her. "You've seen her," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Where is she?" "Somewhere you will never find her." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was very low and very controlled and entirely without warmth. "Think carefully about what you're doing, Clara. Think about what you stand to lose." She looked at her father, really looked at him, and thought about what she had already lost. 20 years of a mother, 20 years of believing a lie, 20 years of building herself in the image of the man who had made that lie. "I already know what I stand to lose," she said. "I'm asking you to think about what you stand to lose." She picked up her bag and walked out. Outside on the pavement, in the thin autumn sunlight, she stood for exactly 1 minute. Then she took out her phone and called the journalist whose name was on an envelope that had waited 20 years to be opened. The story broke on a Wednesday. By Thursday morning, it was everywhere. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the photographs of the ledger, but the USB drives, which contained scanned documents, correspondence, bank transfer records, and a series of recorded conversations that Margaret had made in the months before her disappearance. Conversations in which Richard Williams discussed, in his own measured and careful voice, the mechanics of what he was doing and why it needed to remain hidden. The city did not erupt gradually. It erupted all at once. By Friday, 3 of the officials named in the documents had issued statements through lawyers. By the following week, an independent inquiry had been announced. The boards Richard Williams sat on began, one by one, to request his resignation. His name, the name that had appeared in newspapers under the word philanthropist for 30 years, began to appear under different words. He did not call Clara. She did not call him. What she did instead was quiet and, in its own way, radical. She rented a small house on the edge of the city. Nothing like the penthouse, nothing like the childhood home. With a garden and a kitchen with good light. And she brought her mother there, and she sat across the table from her and they talked. For hours. For days. Not performing reconciliation, not rushing past the hard parts, but simply talking about who they were, about what had been lost, about what, if anything, could be rebuilt. There were days that were very difficult. Grief, Clara discovered, does not simply arrive when loss does. Sometimes it arrives much later, when the lie that was covering the loss finally falls away. She grieved the 18-year-old version of herself who had stood at a fake grave and believed it was real. She grieved the 20 years of a relationship she had not had. She grieved the person she might have been if she had been allowed to grow up with her mother in her life. But she also found something she had not expected. Her mother was not the same woman who had been taken from her. 20 years of surviving alone had changed Margaret in ways that were sometimes startling and sometimes extraordinary. She was wary in ways she had not been. She was also, underneath the wariness, possessed of a kind of clarity about what mattered, about what people were capable of, about the difference between things that could be rebuilt and things that simply had to be grieved and released, that Clara had never encountered in anyone else. In the spring, Clara established a trust. It was not named after her, not named after her mother. It was named after a woman whose casket had been quietly closed and whose real identity had never been restored. The unknown woman whose death had been used to stage Margaret's, whose name nobody in the Williams family had ever known or thought to ask. The trust funded legal support for women in situations of coercive control. It funded emergency accommodation. It funded the kind of help that nobody provides unless someone with resources decides that it matters. It was not absolution. Clara did not believe in absolution. It was simply what came next. Richard Williams was convicted 19 months after the story broke. The sentencing was covered extensively. Clara did not attend the trial. She read the verdict at her kitchen table with her mother sitting across from her, drinking tea. Earl Grey, the same brand Margaret had always bought, a small and enormous thing. "How do you feel?" her mother asked. Clara thought about it. "Like something is finished," she said. "And something else is starting, but I don't have a name for it yet." Her mother nodded. "That's how real things feel," she said. "The ones that matter. They don't come with a clean ending. They just open into the next part." Clara looked at this woman, alive, present, sitting in the morning light with a cup of tea and the particular patience of someone who had learned to wait and understood something she had been working towards for a very long time. Success had never been her protection. It had been her hiding place. The real work, the work of being known, of allowing herself to be found, of sitting in a room with the truth and not flinching, that work had only just begun. And for the first time in 20 years, she was not afraid of it. Because sometimes the person you have been grieving was never actually gone. And sometimes the life you built in their absence was never the one you were meant to live. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the truth you we're most afraid of is the exact truth that sets you free. Not every death is real, and not every truth stays buried forever. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss another story like this. And drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were Clara? Would you have exposed the truth, even knowing it would destroy everything? We read every single comment. See you in the next one.